So I started dive into immunity, just a quick review of immunity generally. We have different types of immunity that we'll look at. Hold on there, give me one moment. Okay, the different types of immunity. Alright. So we have active immunity. Generally, we're speaking about immunity that occurs when the immune system is stimulated to produce antibodies. So when the immune system produces antibodies, that is active, right? So generally, the mechanism is through the response of an antigen, right, leading to production of antibodies from plasma cells and memory cells, right? So we have that. So it usually is a long-lasting duration. So examples would have been recover from an infection from chickenpox or any type of virus, right? So it's also one of the important things on principles of vaccination, which is artificial, right? We have passive immunity generally that is usually seen within the maternal context, right? So passive immunity occurs when performed, right, preformed rather, antibodies or immune cells are transferred from one individual to another, and that's usually through the chorion, right? So that's usually through the umbilical um cord into the fetus per se. For natural immunity, right, that will speak to the natural exposure of pathogens, right, and antigens from the environment, right. So we're looking at the exposure, right, um, general exposure, right, that would lead to any type of bacterial or viral infection that the immune system will have to fight off themselves, right. And we're looking at natural immunity in the way in which, well, the major example for really natural immunity is either fighting off infection yourself, right, or breastfeeding in the case of infants, right. So usually you're gonna have colostrum, right, being ejected into the infant, and colostrum is um actually filled, right, with antibodies, etc. So anybody who does food and nutrition, you'd understand the entire process of natural immunity, all of it. You'd have known it at the back of your hand. Right. So the colostrum that would be present within the first few days of breastfeeding, that would be packed with antibodies and different types of antiviral components. Alright. So we have that here. Artificial immunity now, we know that's generally artificial, that speaks to immunity that is actually coming from some type of man-made or deliberate immunity derived from deliberate intention, right? So vaccination, administration of any type of immune products, right? So vaccination, right, and administration of immunoglobulins, right, would be examples of artificial immunity. So general vaccination, corona vaccination could be either um injecting a weak pathogen inside the organism, or an antigen inside the organism, or the immunoglobulin administration would have been just not actually putting in pieces or the pathogen at all, but putting in the immunoglobulin into the organism, right? Natural passive now, that's generally natural. Well, it's generally a mixture of natural and passive, right? So natural immunity occurring from preformed antibodies, right? So that's usually crossing the maternal placenta or using breastfeeding. Artificial passive immunity, that has to deal with using some type of man-made approach in order to cause the immune system to produce antibodies. So immunoglobulins, right, and vaccination, right. Well, that no, that it's natural passive. No, we're in. Okay, so natural passive is different, right? I just explained natural active, right? But what natural passive would be, right? What it would generally be about is just injecting probably immunoglobulins, right? So it's usually about that, right? The injection of monoclonal antibodies into the system, right? The natural active now, that would be basically any type of bacterial infection, anything like that, suffering from those antigens, and naturally having your body, right, react to it, right? Natural passive now, right, that would occur from generally maternal antibodies and breastfeeding, very very similar. So a lot of them are very very similar, right? So you have those different roles there, right? So you have active, you have passive, you have natural and artificial, right? and then you have the merger between all of them. So you have active natural, active artificial, you have natural passive, natural active, those type of immunities, right? So you should be able to look at them, and that's just basically going over them because they were discussed in CC biology, right? So the roles of vaccination in providing immunity is important. So vaccination plays a crucial role, right, in defending general communities from specific infectious diseases and preventing any type of disease transmission, right? So looking at how an mRNA vaccine works, right? This is for the SARS-CoV-2, right? So COVID. So we have, well, one of the COVID viruses, Coviridae. All right, so we have that here. So the vaccine will contains an mRNA substituent. The mRNA would enter the cell, and the spike protein, right, is recognized. So basically, the production of the spike proteins, right, through the mRNA. Because we know that mRNA codes for proteins, Unit 1 biology, right? So it will actually create spike proteins, right, that will actually trigger the production of antibodies, specific antibodies, right? So that's generally how the how those mRNA vaccines would work, right? And you have different types of vaccines in which they will actually put in weakened cells or weakened cell material, right, into different areas, right? So we have that as well, right? So looking at how, right, they input these different materials, how it will actually increase the proliferation of B cells, right, and produce or beta cells, right, and or memory B cells. So generally that. So vaccination was another thing that you looked at in CSEC, and that was what, 2 years ago. 2 years ago. All right. So just to generally do a review of that, that's what's the last figure. So inducing immune response, right? So that's what vaccines generally do, induce an immune response, right? They increase the amount of virulent factors, right, or pathogenic material within the system and causes an immune response there for active immunity to more or less kick in, I guess. So it kicks in the immune response and causes active immunity. And then with the creation of memory cells that contributes to long-term immunity, as we discussed before, right? And then it aids in preventing disease, right? So by priming the immune system to recognize and respond to different antigens, right, these different pathogens specifically, it allows, right, for the next time you come in contact with these pathogens specifically, right, you actually have the secondary response. So remember when we looked at the responses to long-term immunity, right? Yeah, the first response that does really shallow, right, and the second response is really heightened, right? It now creates the prevalence of that response, right, when any type of these pathogens now reoccur within the system, right? So that's what it generally does. It creates these B cells, right? It gets the primary response over with, so that when you actually come in contact with the virulent factor or the pathogen in the future, right, you can actually defend yourself much better, right? It's also playing a part in producing what we call herd immunity, right? So vaccination programs actually help to achieve herd immunity, and this occurs when significant portion of the population is immune to a disease either through vaccination or natural infection. So it reduces the spread of diseases in the community. So that's what herd immunity is, right? So for example, well, how would I use an example? Let's say that disease A starts to spread through the Caribbean, all right? Persons who are not persons who are resistant to that disease will live, right, or vaccinated will live. Persons who are not will die, all right? After a while, if the disease spreads through the entirety of the population, right, who will die would die, who will live, right? And after a certain point now, all of the population would have gained the antibodies to defend against such disease. So that's herd immunity, when everybody has some amount of factors that would prevent, the disease from killing them, right? Or from infecting a large portion of the population. So when everybody within a population or a significant portion of the population, right, is immune to the disease in some way via vaccination or actually having previous infection before, right? So high vaccination coverage is essential for maintaining herd immunity, right, and protecting vulnerable populations such as infants, the elderly, and individuals with weakened immune systems, right? We also have the eradication of diseases. So vaccination plays a crucial role in the eradication of diseases such as the near extinction or near elimination of diseases like polio, right? These things are still rampant within destitute and poor areas, right, across continents. So we still have an issue with that, and that's not a biological problem. It's not a scientific issue. It's a sociological issue, right? And by reducing the circulation of infectious agents, vaccines contribute to the control and eventual eradication, right, of these target diseases, right? So we're looking at that. We're looking at the role of vaccination, right, in providing immunity, right, and mentions. Look at that. Da, 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 da. All right. So reduces the incidence of diseases there. So that really and truly brings